Hello, everyone, and welcome to Writers and Books Visiting Author Series. My name is Dan Hurd. I'm the Director of Adult Programs. Writers and Books is a nonprofit literary arts center in Rochester, New York. We offer readings, workshops, and literary programming for people of all ages, all currently available online. Our theme for 2021 is Taking Care. We'll be celebrating all the ways we can take care of ourselves and take care of others this year. You can check out our upcoming schedule at wab.org. We're so happy to have Maggie Smith with us this evening. First, we'll hear from Maggie, then she'll be in conversation with our Director of Community Reading Programs, Karen vanMeenen. Feel free to submit questions through the Q&A function. Maggie's book, Keep Moving, is available through our bookstore, Ampersand Books. I'll put the link in the chat. Maggie Smith's poems and essays are widely published and anthologized. Public Radio International has called her poem Good Bones the official poem of 2016. She's the author of 3 books of poetry, Good Bones, The Well Speaks of Its Own Poison, and Lamp of the Body. Her latest book is the collection of essays and quotes, Keep Moving, Notes on Loss, Creativity, and Change. As the author Glennon Doyle has said, Keep Moving speaks to you like an encouraging friend, reminding you that you can feel and survive deep loss, sink into life's deep beauty, and constantly make yourself new. Thank you so much for being here, Maggie.
Oh, Dan, thanks for having me. And Karen, thanks for being here. This is a real treat. I have not quite locked, but at least shut my 2 children into their bedrooms with books of their own tonight. So it is a night of reading for everyone in this house. And may no face appear in the glass French door behind me while we're doing this. So far, so good. I thought I would start by reading an essay, somewhat excerpted from Keep Moving, and then I'd read a few poems, and then take questions about anything you're curious about. I love Q&A, so please do submit questions if you want to pick my brain at all. I'm going to read the last essay in the book, which is called Nesters. When my daughter was in preschool, she wanted to know everything about the world. At ages 3 and 4, she used every short drive to the post office, the library, or the grocery store to ask me big questions from her car seat behind me. What is the earth for? What is the future? What is the past? Where was I before I was in your belly? I could almost hear her mind whirring, unable to shut itself down. I had an old MacBook that did that until it burned my lap. Some nights she couldn't turn the thoughts off. I remember those difficult tuck-ins. I told her, thoughts are like birds. Some just fly away, but others nest. Our thoughts are nesters. They don't want to leave us, and they make themselves right at home. I knew what she must have been picturing, winged thoughts gathering twigs and ribbons, and even, because we'd seen it once, scraps of plastic grocery bags. Winged thoughts weaving a home for themselves in her skull. I told her the truth as I knew it, that her head is such a beautiful place to live, more beautiful than any sycamore, maple, or oak, that no wonder nothing wants to leave her. Nothing and no one, least of all me. I come from a long line of women whose thoughts nest and stay. I hadn't thought about it this way until having children of my own and seeing myself in them. Parenting is like holding up a funhouse mirror. You see some of your best in your children, but you also see some of the rougher parts, exaggerated. I see my own worry, its face huge and distorted. After my ex-husband moved out of the house, my son regressed. He expressed his sadness and anxiety as anger during the day and as fear at night. This child, who had never needed a nightlight, was suddenly terrified to be left alone in his bedroom. I'd lie with him and try to fill him up with good thoughts. Pancakes for breakfast on Saturday and gym tomorrow at school. ice cream from that little shop at Holden Beach, beaches in cream, and hikes in Old Man's Cave. He'd say, I'm trying to think the good thoughts, but the bad thoughts always push them out of the way. I understood the power of bad thoughts. For most of my life, even as a child, I used pessimism as self-protection. My thinking was this: if I expect the worst and the worst doesn't happen, I'll be pleasantly surprised. But if I expect the worst and the worst happens, not only will I be prepared, but I will have been right. I do so love to be right. I even thought that optimism was at odds with intelligence. It was so naive to expect the best, wasn't it? Those people were bound for disappointment. Didn't they know how the world actually worked? I once wrote in a poem that the future is empty. The poem was inspired by one of those questions my daughter asked me when she was in preschool. And this is the poem, which is also in my book, Good Bones. It's called Future, and the epigraph is Violet's question: what is the future? Everything that hasn't happened yet, the future is tomorrow and next year, and when you're old, but also in a minute or two when I'm through answering. The future is nothing I imagined as a child: no jetpacks, no conveyor belt sidewalks, no bell-jarred cities at the bottom of the sea. The trick of the future is that it's empty, a cup before you pour the water. The future is a waiting cup, and for all it knows, you'll fill it with milk instead. You're thirsty. Every minute carries you forward, conveys you into a space you fill. I mean, the future will be full of you. It's one step beyond the step you're taking now, what you'll say next until you say it. What I mean is that the future is empty, even though we tell ourselves we've already filled it. We plan as if somehow those mental blueprints fill the future. We have to imagine some control over the future so we can bear going there into the great wild beyond. But the truth is, it's impossible to predict. The life you've lived for the past 5, 10, or 20 years may not be the life you live 5, 10, or 20 years from now. The partner you expect to be there may or may not be there. The work you do now may change. The money you're saving, the house you're paying down, the apartment you hope to keep, the children you're raising. You see what I mean? Is this freeing or heartbreaking? Comforting or terrifying? All of it all at once? When I was married, I thought of my future as being full. I imagined growing old with this person. I imagined our kids growing up, going off to college. I wondered if we would downsize when they moved out, or if we'd keep the house so the kids and their families would have a place to sleep when they visited us. But the future had always been empty. It's no emptier for me now than it was then. It's no less uncertain. There was never a guarantee that we would stay together or that either of us would live a long life. There was no guarantee that we would be in rocking chairs on a porch somewhere talking about our grandchildren. The difference between my married future and my future alone is just that. I alone have to reimagine, re-envision, yes, revise what might fill it. This life is no longer a group project. I've written that the future is empty, but I could say it another way. The future is full of nothing but possibility. Again, is that freeing or heartbreaking, comforting or terrifying? The next 5 minutes of your life can be one thing or a million other things. You can choose to keep reading this book or not. Are you still here? I hope you're still here. You can make tea or you can take a walk. You can tell someone you love them or you can tell someone it's over. You can put your house on the market. You can go back to school or start looking for a new job. You can decide to love the job you have, the person who sleeps beside you, the person you see in the mirror. The future is empty. How will you fill it? What kinds of thoughts will nest in you? Despite grief and uncertainty, despite trauma and loss, collective and personal, I carry hope with me. I hope you do too. I hope you're pushing forward, refusing to go back to the cluttered past. Yes, the past is full, a hoard, and some of the things back there bring us comfort because they're familiar. But we can't go back there. Even my kids know this. Once you turn 6, there's no being 5 again. My daughter's third grade teacher, Mrs. Allen, talked a lot about what she called the power of yet. She'd tell the kids, "You haven't learned that yet." She'd say, "You don't know how to do that yet." I think about this now as I create a new life for myself. I'm not at home in this life yet, but living is a hopeful act in itself. It's a choice we make daily to be, to keep being. I'm apprenticing myself to hope and learning as much as I can. I'm making space in my mind for the good thoughts so they can nestle in and sing. And that's the end of Keep Moving. I'll read a few poems before we get to questions. I thought I'd read a couple from Good Bones. This is another poem inspired by the questions that Violet asked me in the car when she was in preschool. She is now in middle school. Life is very different. This poem is called Sky, and the epigraph at the top of the poem, which is her question, is, why is the sky so tall and over everything? What you draw as a blue stripe high above a green stripe, white interrupted. The real sky starts at the tip of each blade of grass and goes up, up, as far as you can see. Our house stops at the roof, at the glitter black overlap of shingles where the sky presses down, bearing the weight of space, dark and sparkling on its back. Think of sky not as blue, not as over, but as the invisible surround, a soft suit you wear close to the skin. When you walk, the soles of your feet take turns on the ground, but the rest of you is in the sky, enveloped in sky. As you move through it, you make a tunnel in the precise size and shape of your body. That is not the answer I gave Violet at age 3 in the car. I feel like I should reiterate that. It's hard enough to be the daughter of a poet. You shouldn't have sort of semi-loose sonnets as responses to existential questions. This is kind of a sister poem to that one. And the title runs right into the first sentence of the poem. At your age, I wore a darkness, several sizes too big. It hung on me like a mother's dress. Even now, as we speak, I am stitching a darkness you'll need to unravel, unraveling another you'll need to restitch. What can I give you that you can keep? Once you asked, does the sky stop? It doesn't stop. It just stops being one thing and starts being another. Sometimes we hold hands and tip our heads way back so the blue fills our whole field of vision, so we feel like we're in it. We don't stop. We just stop being what we are and start being what? Where? What can I give you to carry there? These shadows of leaves, the lace in solace, this soft hand-me-down darkness? What can I give you that will be of use in your next life, the one you will live without me? I love that if you look at the word solace, you can see the word lace hiding inside of it. Okay, maybe just a couple more. I'll read Good Bones because I almost always do. And then there's a request. So after this, I'll read one more newer poem that will be in my next book. Good Bones. Life is short, though I keep this from my children. Life is short, and I've shortened mine in 1,000 delicious, ill-advised ways. 1,000 deliciously ill-advised ways I'll keep from my children. The world is at least 50% terrible, and that's a conservative estimate, though I keep this from my children. For every bird, there is a stone thrown at a bird. For every loved child, a child broken, bagged, sunk in a lake. Life is short, and the world is at least half terrible. And for every kind stranger, there is one who would break you, though I keep this from my children. I'm trying to sell them the world, Any decent realtor walking you through a real shithole chirps on about good bones. This place could be beautiful, right? You could make this place beautiful. And I'm going to end with this poem called Written Deer that's in my next book. And it has an epigraph from Szymborska. And the epigraph is, why does this written doe bound through these written woods? And that line of her poem is what inspired my poem. Written Deer. My handwriting is all over these woods. No, my handwriting is these woods, each tree a half print, half cursive scrawl, each loop a limb. My house is somewhere here, and I have scribbled myself inside it. What is home but a book we write, then read again and again, each time dog-earing different pages. In the morning I wake in time to pencil the sun high. How fragile it is, the world. I almost wrote the word, but caught myself. Either one could be erased. In these written woods, branches smudge around me whenever I take a deep breath. Still, written fawns lie in the written sunlight that dapples their backs. What is home but a passage I'm writing and underlining every time I read it? Thanks so much.
Thank you, Maggie. And confession that the request was from me to read that poem. So I am so happy to hear it in your voice tonight to start off our conversation. It reminds me something about it, reminds me of Rumi's Guest House, which is one of my favorites. So there's some element
I love that.
in that is just, it's really beautiful. Thank you. So this book, Keep Moving, which we're both displaying on the same.
I love it. You're doing my thing. I love this. I didn't even ask.
I am so well Zoom versed.
Exactly.
I know this is what authors do. So I'm helping.
Thank you.
Yes, and it strikes me that Keep Moving it fits so well with Writers and Books theme for the year of Take Care. A year, obviously a year that we're continuing to need to take good care of ourselves and each other. And I don't know which order, each other or ourselves. Maybe there is no hierarchy, but it's crucial. And that is what this book helps us to do. So it's a book, I'm going to give a tiny little background question, a book of short essays and affirmations of goal setting towards kind of tangible life-changing accomplishments. Like there are things, actions you can take as a result of reading this book. And you began this during a difficult time after several losses, and poetry, you write, wasn't coming to you. That, that's your usual form, and it just wasn't coming to you. And you decided to use social media my understanding is a platform for you to kind of have this discipline to write every day. And I'm wondering, were you a social media user much before? It's kind of a multi-layered question. And did you have this intuition that you just needed that to be to have some accounting, or did you feel that there was something you had to say for other people that they could benefit as well?
I had been on social media for a few years. Good Bones sort of made that a part of my life in 2016. So when I started tweeting my sort of notes to self that later became Keep Moving, it was the fall of 2018. So I'd been on Twitter for a while, but I hadn't really used it in this personal way before. It was more about literary citizenship. Like, here's a reading I'm giving. Are you in this city and would you like to come? Or here's a link to a poem I read by this other poet that I love and I want to share it with you, or this record I'm listening to. So it was about sort of literary community more than about, wow, I'm really struggling. Here's this thing that I'm dealing with. And so when I started writing these notes to self, it didn't even occur to me to just put them in a journal or on a Post-it note and keep them to myself. I don't keep a journal. I've never had a diary. If I write something, 9 times out of 10, it's either, practical, like a grocery list or a to-do list, or it's something that I expect to have some kind of audience, or the goal is for it to have some kind of audience. And so when I started posting these, it was really about holding myself accountable for the intention, but also kind of a way of coming clean. Because I think one of the dangers of social media, and I think we've seen recently, there are many, one of the dangers of social media is that we curate our space in such a way that we post pictures when we look good, and we talk about our kids when they're behaving, and we really try to I like cleaned up even the room behind me tonight because I was worried there was going to be clutter showing through the door. So we really do, I think, we're not showing shots of our dirty dishes, and so it seemed to me to be important to say I'm struggling, even without divulging a lot of details, because I think when we tell people that we're struggling, we're actually giving them a gift. We're not being a burden, because regardless of whether they're going through something similar or hard but different, knowing that other people are struggling too, I think makes us feel less alone in it. And the danger of social media is that everybody looks like they've got it together. And if you don't, it makes you feel awful lonesome in that act. And so it felt important to me to do it. And what happened was I heard from all these people who were either going through divorces, or they had lost their jobs, or their kids had moved out of their house and they were empty nesters, and suddenly life felt really different and kind of sad and empty. And, whatever the thing was, these notes that I wrote for myself, because I'm the you in all of them, somehow were connecting with other people. And then that made me feel less alone in what I was going through. So it worked on several levels, and it ended up for me being really, really powerful.
There's an essay later in the book where you talk about alone, being lonely and being alone. And at the end of it, you talk about the writing process being such a solitary endeavor. And this line really struck me deeply. But you're here reading this. You're here too.
Yeah.
Look, you're here too with me. We're all here reading this, the power of the word, of literature, and the power of telling our stories and not, keeping the dirt on the roots. So I really appreciate that you transformed, social media, which quite deservedly gets a bad reputation, into something quite beautiful and communal.
Yeah, I mean, I think the space is only as good as your use of it. So if you use any tool for good, it's a good tool. If you use a tool for evil, it is an evil tool. And I think, it can be a really problematic space, but it can also be a really wonderful way to connect with other people. And I think particularly over the past 12 months, with all of us being so sort of hemmed in and isolated, I have really counted on those connections and friendships, which, really feel and are authentic. It doesn't feel surface to me, those connections that I've made with people. And later when we meet in person, it'll be lovely.
I want to ask about the book's structure, because again, this is not a collection of poetry. I think there's only one poem, Future, is in there, and just a couple other literary references, which is interesting. Nikki Giovanni, Walt Whitman, Emily Dickinson, just a very few scattered. And so two-part, the structure has these 3 sections. And I admit, when I first saw the first section of a book called Revision was jarring, right? Doesn't that come last? Doesn't that come later? And then of course it's followed by Resilience and Transformation. So it does come and make some sense as the essays are woven through. So how did that structure fall into place, both between, the notes, the aphorisms, I'm not sure what to call them.
I don't know either.
Right? And
yeah, I call them notes to self.
Yes.
Or, I refer to them as self-pep talks, because that's basically what they were, for me personally, was, I was just trying to talk myself through a bad time. Yeah, so trying to organize this book was interesting because at first I thought it was really going to be just a collection of the quotes themselves. And then in a conversation with my editor, it was her suggestion to have me write some longer essays. And they're still short, but some longer pieces that might help give some context to the essays and just sort of put a little bit more meat on the bone. And that was actually really enjoyable for me because as a poet, I tend to write into very small spaces. And I even talk about in the book, like revision for me usually means a thing gets smaller. I'm a whittler, not an expander as I write. So it was honestly a nice and enjoyable challenge to have to write to the right-hand margin of the page over and over again, and to have a little bit more breathing room and, leg room to write about these things. And then structurally, the question was what's the sort of arc of this book? Because I wrote it in real time. I mean, I wrote this book in 2019 without any real emotional or intellectual distance from this hard time. I wrote it through the hard time. And so for me, it seemed like the arc of getting through the hard time was one, revision, like literal re-envisioning, being able to see your life as something different or let go of the vision that you had for it. And in order to make room for whatever it was going to be, whether you liked it or not. And then the second one is resilience, because I thought, well, that's the thing you really need to get from point A to point B, is that strength. So that seemed to be like the core of that experience. And then if we're lucky, transformation is that thing that happens later. And that's when you come through the thing and look back at where you were 6 months or a year ago, and you can't believe you've walked the distance that you've walked and how different you feel having walked that distance. And I didn't, in some ways I wasn't feeling the transformation as fully when I turned in the book as I feel it, now a couple years later. It took a little time. I needed to kind of steep in it a little bit more.
This is very much a process of therapeutic writing, expressive writing. And that's what struck me, because that's part of what I do, what I did as a writer and what I've done professionally, in how I serve the community, and empathy comes into play here, which you also touch on. So would you like to share any more about, you said you didn't keep a journal, which is kind of surprising to me. I've read the book. It sounds like someone who's kept a journal.
No.
It's self-reflective, Can you say any more about therapeutic writing, expressive writing in your world beyond this project, either before or going forward?
This project was such a one-off for me. This is not typically the kind of writing I do. I've never written anything like this before. I don't really see doing anything quite like this again. It sort of served its purpose for me. And I've called it sort of jokingly, but I mean it. It was literal self-help. Mm-hmm. And I remember calling my mom and saying, I think I'm writing a self-help book, and kind of laughing about it because, I'm a poet. That's what I do. I really haven't written a ton of prose, period. So the idea that I was writing a self-help book in the middle of like the deepest, darkest time of my life was something that we kind of chuckled about also, but it was necessary. Like this was my tool. I basically wrote my way from that space into the space that I'm living now. So I don't really see doing this kind of writing again. Will I keep writing prose? Yes. Mm-hmm. But probably not the way that I did it and Keep Moving. I mean, this feels like a really like time specific project to me. And I don't keep a journal, but I have to say I do keep a notebook because I don't know how to type. So I don't type. So everything I write longhand first, and then I type it later, or, thank God I can like do text to type or something and use like a Chrome extension But so I do, write in a notebook, but I wouldn't call it a journal because they're all lines I expect to use in a poem or a metaphor or an idea I want for an essay. It's always ideas for something that will later, with any luck, have an audience.
So there won't be a Keep Moving for kids anytime soon?
I don't think so. Although I did finish,
For dummies.
I did just finish a picture book manuscript that's kind of based on the essay I read tonight about thoughts nesting in brains. So, but not quite.
I set you up for that. I didn't even know that. So wonderful,
Right.
wonderful. That's of my favorite essays in the book. So that's
thank you.
I want to go back to empathy because I find so much empathy in this book for the human condition, for struggle. In what ways besides this writing process have you found to be, find empathy for yourself, to be kind, to be gracious to yourself?
So much of this project is about, I think, self-compassion, which is something I think we're all a little short on, like when our friends or mothers or sisters or neighbors are going through hard times and they call us or reach out, I think it's really easy for us to be like, oh my gosh, you're going to find another job because you're amazing. And what was your boss thinking? Or I can't believe he broke up with you. He's not going to find anybody better than you. Or, you're going to get through this. You're a great mom or you're a great dad. Or, we pep talk others so well and we believe it. But when it comes to us, we too often feel shame also around going through hard times. If we lose a job or a relationship ends or whatever happens, I think we are really good at beating ourselves up and not having empathy for ourselves in the same way that we would have it for someone else. And so part of this sort of daily practice was about teaching myself to talk a little kinder to myself and the idea that we deserve the compassion that we extend to others. And that's not weakness or softness. And you're not coddling yourself by, cutting yourself some slack and being gentle with yourself. So that's been something I've had to learn, or rather the sort of hardness on myself is something I've had to unlearn. And I don't think I'm alone in that. And I think being a parent is part of that unlearning, because I know not only do my kids hear what I say to them and see how I treat them, they see how I treat myself. They see my level of confidence. They see whatever acts of self-care or however, it's sort of like secure your own mask first, right? Before you try to put the oxygen on your other person. And so, I think part of it is, particularly as a single parent, I'm thinking a lot about how do I model taking care of myself and that balance of taking care of others but not being selfless. Like there is a lot of real estate between selfish and selfless. And I'd like to live somewhere in the middle, where I'm caring about other people, but I'm also not a martyr and sacrificing myself to a point where I actually can't function because I'm just giving and giving and giving and giving and giving. And, preserving, like mom needs a half an hour to write right now, or mom is going to go take a bath, read a book, or mom has a Zoom. Please read quietly in your bedrooms until I come up and tuck you in when it's over. I think seeing particularly women, I think both my daughter and my son, seeing me have a balanced life where I'm taking care of them and they're clearly the priority, but I also have other stuff going on. I think it's really, really important for both of them, both my boy and my girl, to see that.
That struck me, that this is, it's very much a book about a woman's experience, a single mom's experience. And of course, the book is predicated on, a divorce and that right. grieving process. So as a parent, you have, the book is Keep Moving, and there's all this looking forward. And when you have children, there's that extra impetus, because there will be, you also talk in the book about, and you spoke earlier, you can never be sure, but there's this hope. And so I saw you in an interview and you said, when you started writing these notes, you were trying on hope like a garment. So I'm wondering now, how does hope fit you now? And what does it look like?
It fits better, but every day is different. So there are days where it doesn't feel great. I mean, and I think that's okay. I think, someone said something the other day and they used the phrase, a friend of mine used the phrase toxic positivity. And I thought, that's a thing, like the good vibes only. People, I don't want that. I want all your vibes.
Right.
Like, you do not have to show up and be happy. If you're my friend and you're having a bad day, I'm not going to try to talk you out of it. I think sometimes days just don't go well. The key is knowing that that day just didn't go well, but like there's tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day. So I think, having realistic expectations and cutting ourselves some slack and knowing that some days are going to feel more hopeful than others, particularly last year and this year. I think that's completely normal. I think, knock wood, I think I'm through the worst of it. And that's a good feeling. And it doesn't make me feel invincible, but it makes me feel like, okay, I got through what I think is probably the most destabilizing and painful experience that I've had to date. And I did it okay. And I'm in one piece. And I actually did some pretty cool things during that period of time to boot, in addition to surviving and keeping my kids alive and in school and, eating their vegetables. And so having done that gives me hope for the future, and not because I think it's going to be easy, but because I know there will be times when it's hard and I can do it because I've done it.
I have to admit that I've been a terrible timekeeper, and we're up against near closing, and there are several questions. So I'm going to kind of wrap a couple questions together. So a couple of people are interested in your writing process, your writing routine. You talked about keeping a notebook. Is there anything else that you could share?
I don't write every day. I feel like that's worth saying, so that in case people feel like they should be, I'll let you off the hook. You don't have to write every day. I think thinking is part of the writing process. So if I don't actually put pen to paper every day, it's okay, because probably something is percolating up here. I just had an idea upstairs reading with my son before I came down to do this Zoom, and I haven't written it down yet. And I might not today, and I might not tomorrow, but I will. And so I'm going to count that as writing for the day. I think I tend to work slowly, and I tend to work by accruing things over time. So a poem, it's not like I sit down and write a poem. I sit down and jot a line down in my notebook and then forget about it for 3 months. And then when flipping through said notebook 3 months later, I'm like, oh, that actually has some potential. And then at that point, I've got another idea for maybe another line or image that might attach to it. And it might start to snowball then, or I might just forget about it or come back to it a week or two later. So it takes a lot of time for me to make something small, even because it tends to require kind of a cobbling together of pieces over time. I think Good Bones is really the only poem I wrote in a sitting, which is weird for me, because it's the poem that most people know, but it's not at all representative of how I write a poem.
Well, someone asked a particular poem about Good Bones, which is very timely. They say, this sounds like it has a similar hope at the end as in Amanda Gorman's poem. If only we can see it, if only we can be it. Can you comment on this?
I love that. Well, I loved her poem. And the fact that we have a poet on the cover of Time magazine and reading at the Super Bowl is a win for all of us. I think it's fantastic. I think, what I got from her poem is, I think, a similar idea to what I was trying to communicate in Good Bones, which is light and darkness, right? Like we have the capacity to do so much, and yet we have messed up in colossal ways, and we have to reckon with that also. And so sort of holding the dark and the light at the same time, and not turning away from one and focusing on the other, and not turning away from this one to focus on this one because maybe that's more comfortable. I think holding space for the hard stuff and the hopeful stuff is really important, because we can't actually move forward and make meaningful changes unless we reckon with the mistakes and history. We just can't. We can't just paint over it. That's not real change or real progress. And so I take that as a compliment. Yeah.
That makes the word honor comes to mind, that we need to honor all that we are and we have been in order to keep moving. I'm going to package two other questions. Is it exhausting, the performance of social media? And where do you find the courage to share your work? I think that probably means in general. And are you ever afraid to be so vulnerable?
I don't really find social media exhausting because it's a choice. So I guess if it were tiring me out, I'd just put my phone down. I don't actually find it exhausting. I mean, I kind of tend to engage in bursts, and then I might disappear for several hours or a day because I'm, homeschooling or something. So I don't find it exhausting. And particularly during the pandemic, it's been a really lovely way to stay connected to friends and other writers and readers across the country. So that hasn't really been an issue for me. I don't feel compulsory about it at all. If I don't enjoy it, I just don't do it. I think, more of life should be like that. As far as courage and vulnerability, I don't know. I guess I just was sick of feeling afraid. And I still feel like that. I just think there's no worse feeling than fear. Even anger, which I think feels terrible in the body. I would much rather be sad than angry. But I'd rather be angry than afraid. Afraid to me personally feels the worst. And fear is so often about the unknown and about thinking about what might happen. If X, then Y, if Y, then Z. And the quickest way out of that sort of chain of thinking is just to do it, because then you get the consequence, whatever it is, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. And so I find that not having secrets is really a lot more comfortable for me than having them.
That's a nice ending note, but I'm going to add one more thing.
Yes.
Dan, bear with us. This is too good. One of my favorite things in the book is early on, and it's what you raised your children with this concept of the beauty emergency. And my family did the same thing, but we didn't have a name for it. So for those who haven't read the book, it's when there's something that you must pay attention to right now. There's a beauty happening, and we must stop what we're doing, pay attention. So I would like you to end by describing for us your most recent beauty emergency.
Oh, the snowstorm just as we were eating dinner. The kids and I were having dinner tonight. I made pancakes and blueberry compote because I'm awesome.
Yeah.
And I was going to lock them in their rooms for an hour with books tonight. So I was like, I'll make pancakes and blueberry compote. And we were sitting at the table and looked outside, and it was just starting to really blow into the street lights in the alley behind my house. And that was perfect. But I think a sunrise is the perfect example of a beauty emergency, because the sky is only going to be that pink orange. I mean, for less than a minute. It really is so fast. And if you run downstairs to get your camera, you're probably going to miss it. So you just have to let your mind be the camera.
Yeah. Thank you. So we really are out of time, but what a delight. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. And please, I think Dan's going to come in to talk about where you can get the book, but we're just so grateful for you to join us here.
It was my pleasure.
We have the opportunity on Zoom to bring in voices even during snowstorms. So thank you so much, Maggie. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really wonderful. Thank you to Karen vanMeenen. Thank you to Maggie Smith. Buy Keep Moving at Ampersand Books. The link is in the chat. If you've missed our past readings, you can catch up with videos on our website, wab.org. And thank you all for coming, and have a good night.
Night all. Thank you.